The dust cloud rose behind the stagecoach like a funeral shroud, and Fiona Edwards watched through tear-blurred eyes as her cousin Marianne disappeared into the shimmering heat of the Colorado afternoon, taking with her every last cent they had traveled west with together. 3 months ago, Fiona had trusted Marianne with everything. Her parents had died in a typhoid outbreak back in Philadelphia in the spring of 1882, leaving Fiona alone at 21 with a modest inheritance and dreams of starting fresh somewhere. The air did not smell of factory smoke and death. Marianne, her mother's sister's daughter, had been kind then, sweet-talking and full of promises about the opportunities waiting in Colorado territory. They would open a dress shop together, Marianne had said. They would build a life in Greeley, that progressive town founded on principles of temperance and good living. Fiona had signed over her inheritance to Marianne for safekeeping during the journey, trusting the older woman's experience with business matters. The first hint of trouble came when they arrived in Greeley 2 weeks ago. Marianne had grown distant, secretive about their funds. Then yesterday, Fiona discovered the horrible truth while Marianne thought she was at the general store. The ledger showed it all. Every dollar gambled away in Denver during their stopover. Every cent spent on fine dresses and jewelry for Marianne herself, while Fiona made do with her worn traveling clothes. When Fiona confronted her, Marianne's mask had finally dropped. Cold eyes, a cruel mouth, words that cut deeper than any blade. "You were always the pretty one, the one everyone loved," Marianne had hissed. "Did you think I would let you have everything? Your parents' money bought me a new start, and you can rot here for all I care." This morning, Marianne had left on the westbound stage with a man she had been meeting secretly, a gambler with slicked hair and empty promises. She left Fiona with nothing but the clothes on her back and $3 tucked in her boot, coins Fiona had kept hidden for emergencies. Now Fiona stood on the dusty street of Greeley as the September sun beat down mercilessly, her small carpetbag clutched in trembling hands. The boarding house where they had been staying demanded payment she could not provide. $3 would buy her perhaps 2 meals and a single night's lodging if she was careful. And then what? She had no family, no friends, no prospects in this frontier town where everyone seemed to know everyone else except her. She forced herself to walk, putting one foot in front of the other, even though her legs felt like water. The main street stretched before her, lined with false-fronted buildings that promised civilization but delivered only harsh reality. A saloon, a bank, a land office, a feed store. Men in dusty hats and work-worn clothes moved about their business, occasionally glancing at her with curiosity or something less innocent. She clutched her bag tighter and kept her eyes forward. The hotel keeper had been apologetic, but firm when she tried to negotiate. $3 bought her tonight only, and she would need to vacate by noon tomorrow. Fiona climbed the narrow stairs to the tiny room with its iron bedstead and cracked pitcher, closed the door, and finally allowed herself to cry. Great heaving sobs that tore through her chest and left her gasping. She had been so foolish, so trusting. Her parents would have been ashamed of how easily she had been deceived. When the tears finally subsided, she washed her face in the tepid water from the pitcher and studied herself in the small mirror. Red-rimmed blue eyes stared back at her, framed by honey blonde hair that had come loose from its pins during her distress. She was pretty. Everyone had always said so, but what good was a pretty face without money or prospects? She could not even afford the train fare back to Philadelphia, and what waited for her there anyway? The house had been sold to pay debts. Her parents' friends had scattered or forgotten her already. She had two choices as far as she could see: find work immediately or starve. Greeley was not a mining town or a cattle town exactly, but agricultural, proud of its irrigation colony principles and its aspirations toward refinement. Perhaps someone needed a seamstress or a governess. She could read and write well, do figures, and her needlework had always been praised. Surely someone needed help. The next morning, Fiona set out with determination, despite spending a sleepless night planning and worrying. She wore her best dress, a gray wool that was far too warm for September in Colorado, but at least looked respectable. Her hair was pinned neatly, her face composed, despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. She visited every shop, every business that might need a clerk or assistant. The answers were all the same, delivered with varying degrees of sympathy. No positions available. Times were hard. Perhaps try the boarding houses. They sometimes needed kitchen help. The boarding houses were no better. The respectable ones wanted references and experience she could not provide. The less respectable ones made offers that turned her stomach and sent her fleeing back into the street. By mid-afternoon, she had exhausted every possibility she could think of, and her $3 had dwindled to one after purchasing a small bread roll and paying a boy to carry a message to a potential employer who never responded. She found herself walking aimlessly, her feet carrying her away from the main streets toward the outskirts of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The October wind had picked up, carrying the scent of dried grass and the distant mountains. Her stomach cramped with hunger and fear. What would she do? Where would she go? The reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave, threatening to drag her under. She did not realize how far she had wandered until she stumbled, her vision swimming with dizziness brought on by hunger and exhaustion. The world tilted, and she put out her hands to catch herself, but her knees hit the ground hard enough to jar her teeth. Her carpetbag fell beside her, spilling its meager contents onto the dust. A spare chemise, a hairbrush, a tintype of her parents. Everything she had left in the world, lying in the dirt of Colorado territory. "Madam? Madam, are you all right?" The voice came from somewhere above her, deep and concerned. Fiona tried to push herself up, but her arms shook with the effort. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, steadying her, and she found herself looking up into a face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. "I am fine," she managed to say, though it was obviously a lie. "I just need a moment." "You don't look fine." The man crouched beside her, and she could see him better now. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes the color of worn saddle leather. His face was sun-bronzed and angular, with a strong jaw and a nose that had been broken at least once. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, denim trousers and a faded blue shirt, a bandana around his neck, dusty from the trail. "When did you last eat?" "This morning," Fiona lied, not wanting charity from a stranger, especially not a man. She had learned quickly that nothing came without a price in this hard country. Those brown eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Try again," he said quietly, "and this time tell me the truth." "Yesterday," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Noon yesterday. But I do not need your help. I am quite capable of taking care of myself." "I can see that," he said, but there was no mockery in his tone, only a kind of gentle humor. "Which is why you are on the ground in the middle of nowhere, with your belongings scattered around you." He began gathering her things, handling even her underthings with a matter-of-fact efficiency that somehow did not feel intrusive. "My name is Zachary Xavier. I work the cattle ranch about 5 miles east of here." "And you are?" "Fiona Edwards." She accepted his help standing, hating how weak her legs felt. "I arrived in Greeley 2 weeks ago with my cousin. She left yesterday for California, and I am simply between situations at the moment." "Between situations," Zachary repeated, still holding her carpetbag. "Is that what they are calling destitute these days?" Heat flooded her cheeks, shame and anger mixing together. "I am not destitute. I simply need to find employment, which I will do shortly. Now, if you will excuse me, I should return to town." "To do what? Faint on Main Street instead of out here?" He shook his head. "At least out here, the only witnesses are prairie dogs and one nosy cowboy. Come on, my horse is just over that rise. You are going to have a proper meal before you do anything else. I cannot accept charity from a stranger. Good thing I am not offering charity then." He started walking, apparently assuming she would follow. After a few steps, he looked back. I am offering a meal to someone who needs one. Tomorrow you can be proud and independent. Today you can be practical and fed. Your choice, Miss Edwards, but make it quick because I have chores waiting. Fiona stood frozen with indecision for a long moment. Every instinct screamed at her not to trust him, not to go anywhere with a man she did not know. But what choice did she have? She had no money for food, no prospects, and nowhere to sleep after tonight. At least if she ate something, she might have the strength to keep looking for work tomorrow. She followed him over the rise where a beautiful bay gelding stood patiently ground-tied, grazing on the sparse grass. Zachary secured her bag to his saddle, then mounted in one fluid motion and extended his hand to her. Have you ever ridden? Only side saddle, and not often. Then hold tight. He pulled her up behind him as if she weighed nothing, and Fiona had no choice but to wrap her arms around his waist to keep her balance. She could feel the solid warmth of him through his shirt, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. It was improper, scandalous even, but she was too tired and hungry to care about propriety anymore. They rode in silence through the golden afternoon, the mountains rising purple and magnificent in the distance. The land seemed endless here, so different from the crowded streets of Philadelphia. Despite everything, Fiona felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of tension easing as the wind whipped past them. This country was harsh and unforgiving, but there was a beauty to it that called to something deep in her soul. The Xavier Ranch was smaller than she expected, a neat house of whitewashed wood with a barn and several outbuildings arranged around a dusty yard. Chickens scratched in the dirt, and a few cattle grazed in a nearby pasture. It was modest, but well maintained, speaking of careful stewardship and hard work. Zachary dismounted and helped her down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Wait here a moment. He disappeared into the house, leaving Fiona standing awkwardly in the yard. A few minutes later, he emerged with an older woman who wore a simple calico dress and an expression of warm concern. This is my mother, Martha Xavier, Zachary said. Ma, this is Miss Fiona Edwards. She needs a meal and maybe a place to rest for a bit. Martha Xavier had the same brown eyes as her son, set in a face weathered by sun and wind, but still handsome. She looked Fiona up and down with a frankness that might have been insulting if not for the kindness behind it. You look half-starved, child. Come inside right now. Zachary, see to your horse and then wash up. Supper will be ready in 20 minutes. The kitchen was warm and bright, with copper pots hanging from hooks and herbs drying in bundles by the window. The smell of baking bread made Fiona's stomach clench with longing. Martha sat her down at the wooden table and immediately began bustling about, slicing bread, ladling stew from a pot on the stove, pouring milk from a pottery jug. Now eat slowly, Martha instructed, setting the food before her. Your stomach will hurt otherwise if you have been going without. Fiona tried to obey, but the first taste of the rich beef stew nearly undid her. She had to blink back tears as she ate, forcing herself to take small bites, even though she wanted to devour everything on the plate. Martha watched her with a knowing expression, but said nothing, only refilled her bowl when she finished, and cut another thick slice of bread. Zachary returned, just as Fiona was finishing her second helping, his hair damp from washing. He sat across from her at the table and accepted his own meal from his mother. Did she tell you anything? We were focused on feeding her properly, Martha said with a pointed look at her son. There will be time for talking after. Now eat your supper before it gets cold. They ate in comfortable silence, though Fiona was acutely aware of Zachary's eyes on her occasionally, assessing rather than judging. When the meal was finished and the dishes cleared, Martha made tea and they sat around the table in the lengthening shadows of evening. Now then, Martha said gently, tell us how you came to be walking alone outside of town with no food and nowhere to go. Fiona had been dreading this question, but she found herself telling them everything about her parents' death, about Mary Ann's betrayal, about the inheritance stolen, and the desperate job search, and the terrible realization that she had nothing and no one. Her voice remained steady throughout, but tears slipped down her cheeks nonetheless, silent witnesses to her grief and shame. When she finished, Martha reached across the table and gripped her hand. "That woman should be horsewhipped," she said fiercely. "Taking advantage of family like that. But you listen to me, Fiona Edwards. This is not your fault. You trusted someone you should have been able to trust. That does not make you foolish. It makes you decent. It makes me homeless," Fiona said quietly. "I have $1 left and nowhere to sleep after tonight. I looked for work all day and found nothing. I do not know what I am going to do." Zachary and Martha exchanged a long look, one of those silent conversations that families have perfected over years. Finally, Martha nodded and Zachary turned to Fiona. "We could use help here," he said carefully. "Ma has been saying for months that she needs an extra pair of hands, especially with the preserving and the winter preparations coming up. We cannot pay much, but we can offer room and board and a small wage. It would give you time to figure out your next step." Pride warred with desperation in Fiona's chest. She did not want to be a charity case, but she also did not want to sleep in the street. "I do not want your pity." "Good, because we are not offering it," Martha said briskly. "I genuinely need help. My hands are not what they used to be, all this arthritis making it hard to do the fine work, and with Zachary's father gone these past 2 years, there is more work than we can handle. You would be earning your keep, and then some." "Your father," Fiona said softly. "I am sorry for your loss." "Heart gave out," Zachary said, his voice rough. "He was a good man. Worked this land for 20 years, trying to make something of it. Now it is just Ma and me, and we are doing our best. But it is not easy." Fiona looked between them, these two strangers who had shown her more kindness in a few hours than her own blood had in months. "I can cook and clean and sew," she said slowly. "I can read and write and do figures. I am not afraid of hard work." "Then we have an agreement," Martha said, standing and brushing off her apron. "You will take the spare room upstairs. It is small but clean, and the window looks east, so you will get the morning sun. We will settle on wages in the morning, once we have discussed what work needs doing. For tonight you will rest and recover your strength." The room was indeed small, barely large enough for the narrow bed and simple dresser, but to Fiona it looked like a palace. Clean sheets, a quilt stitched in a wedding ring pattern, a rag rug on the wooden floor, a basin and pitcher on the dresser, and that precious window Martha had mentioned. Fiona set her carpet bag down and simply stood for a moment, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of her fortunes. A soft knock came at the door, and Martha entered carrying a bundle. "These were mine when I was younger," she said, setting down 2 simple dresses and a nightgown. "They might be a bit loose on you, but they will do until we can make you some proper work clothes. That wool dress you have on will have you fainting from heat in no time." "I cannot take your clothes," Fiona protested. "You can and you will." Martha's tone brooked no argument. "We take care of our own here, Fiona. You work for us now, which makes you part of this household. That means you get fed properly, clothed properly, and treated with respect. That is how the Xavier family operates. Do you understand?" "Yes, madam," Fiona whispered, clutching the dresses to her chest. "Thank you. For everything." Martha's weathered face softened. "You are welcome, child. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow, we will start fresh, and I promise you, things will look better in the morning light." After Martha left, Fiona changed into the nightgown and slipped between the clean sheets. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind spun with the events of the day. This morning she had been desperate and alone. Tonight she had a roof over her head and the promise of work. It was not the life she had imagined when she left Philadelphia, but it was honest and respectable, and that was more than she had hoped for when she fell in the dust this afternoon. She thought of Zachary, The way he had looked at her with those steady brown eyes, the gentleness in his strong hands. He had saved her today, though she suspected he would reject that characterization. He had simply helped someone in need, the way any decent person would. But there had been something in his expression, some spark of connection that made her heart beat faster, even now in the darkness. Tomorrow she would start working, earning her place in this household. She would prove herself valuable and capable. And she would absolutely not think about the way Zachary's arms had felt around her on the horse, or the warmth of his smile across the supper table. She could not afford distractions, not when she was rebuilding her life from nothing. The next morning, Fiona woke to golden sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from below. She dressed quickly in one of Martha's dresses, a simple blue cotton that was indeed a bit loose but serviceable. After pinning her hair into a neat bun, she made her way downstairs to find the kitchen already bustling with activity. Martha stood at the stove, and Zachary sat at the table with a ledger book spread before him, a pencil tucked behind his ear. He looked up when Fiona entered, and something flickered across his face too quickly for her to identify. "Good morning," she said, suddenly shy. "What can I do to help?" "Start by eating breakfast," Martha said, already fixing a plate. "Then we will go over the work that needs doing. Zachary, stop scowling at those numbers and eat your food before it gets cold." "I am not scouring. I am calculating," Zachary said, but he closed the ledger and accepted the plate his mother handed him. "The cattle prices are lower this year, and we need to decide how many head to sell before winter." "You will figure it out, you always do," Martha said with the confidence of a mother who believes absolutely in her son's abilities. She sat across from Fiona and launched into a description of the daily routine. Chickens to feed, eggs to gather, garden to tend, meals to prepare, washing and mending and preserving. It was a daunting list, but Fiona found herself nodding eagerly, relieved to have purpose again. They settled on wages of $2 a week plus room and board, which seemed generous to Fiona, though Martha insisted it was fair for the amount of work involved. After breakfast, Zachary headed out to tend the cattle, and Martha began teaching Fiona the rhythms of ranch life. The work was harder than anything Fiona had done before, but she threw herself into it with determination. Her hands, soft from city life, quickly developed blisters that Martha treated with salve. Her back ached from bending over the garden, and her arms trembled from carrying water and laundry. But each night she fell into bed with the satisfaction of having earned her keep, and each morning she woke eager to do it again. Zachary was a quiet presence around the ranch, often gone for hours checking fences or moving cattle. But during meals, Fiona began to learn more about him. He was 26, had been born in this house, and had never traveled farther east than Denver. He loved this land with a fierce devotion that showed in every word he spoke about it. He was patient and kind to his mother, firm but gentle with the animals, and unfailingly polite to Fiona in a way that made her chest tighten with something she did not want to examine too closely. She noticed other things, too. The way he always made sure she had the best portions at meals, how he took on the heaviest chores without being asked, saving her and Martha the hardest physical labor. The way his eyes followed her sometimes when he thought she was not looking, with an expression that made her breath catch. 3 weeks passed in this fashion, settling into routine and comfort. Fiona's body adapted to the work, growing stronger, her hands calloused over, and she learned to milk the cow without getting kicked, to churn butter until her arms burned, to preserve vegetables and fruits for the winter ahead. Martha praised her needlework and had her mending all their clothes, then teaching her to cut and sew new garments from fabric Martha had been hoarding. October brought cooler weather and the need to prepare the ranch for winter. Zachary worked from dawn to dusk, securing the buildings, repairing the barn roof, chopping and stacking firewood. Fiona helped where she could, holding boards steady while he hammered, stacking the smaller pieces of wood, bringing him water and food when he forgot to stop for meals. One afternoon, she climbed the ladder to hand him nails while he worked on the barn roof. He reached down to take them from her, and their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, innocent, but electricity shot through Fiona's entire body. She looked up and found Zachary staring at her with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. Fiona, he said quietly, her name rough on his lips. Yes? He opened his mouth as if to say something important, then seemed to think better of it. Thank you for the help. You should get down before you fall. She descended the ladder on shaking legs, disturbed by her reaction to such a simple touch. This was dangerous territory. Zachary was her employer, and she was dependent on his and Martha's generosity. She could not afford to develop feelings that would complicate her situation. But her heart, it seemed, had not consulted her practical mind before deciding to race every time he walked into a room. That evening after supper, Martha announced she was going to bed early with a headache. Fiona cleaned up the dishes while Zachary worked on his ledgers at the table. The kitchen was quiet except for the scratch of his pencil and the soft clink of plates. When Fiona finished, she found herself hesitating instead of heading upstairs. May I ask you something? She said finally, turning to face him. Zachary looked up, setting down his pencil. Of course. Why did you help me that day? You did not know me. I could have been anyone, a thief or a liar or worse. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the lamplight. My father used to say that the measure of a person is what they do when no one is watching, he said finally. I help because it is right, not because I expect anything in return. You were in trouble and needed help. It was as simple as that. It does not feel simple, Fiona said softly. You and your mother have been so kind to me. I do not know how I will ever repay you. You repay us every day by working hard and being honest. He stood and crossed to where she stood by the counter. But there is something I need to tell you, something I have been trying to say for weeks now. Fiona's heart hammered against her ribs. What is it? When I found you that day in the dust, something happened that I did not expect. His voice was low, earnest. I looked at you, and I felt like I had been waiting my whole life without knowing what I was waiting for. These weeks with you here, getting to know you, watching you become part of this place, it has only made that feeling stronger. Zachary, she whispered, not sure if it was a protest or a plea. I know this is not the time or the place, he continued. You have been through something terrible, and you need time to heal and find your footing. I am not trying to take advantage of your situation or make you feel obligated, but I needed you to know that what I feel for you is real, and if there is any chance that you might come to feel the same way someday, I will wait as long as it takes. Tears sprang to Fiona's eyes, but these were different from the bitter tears she had shed over Marianne's betrayal. These were tears of relief and joy, and something that felt dangerously like hope. You do not need to wait, she said. I already feel the same way. I have for weeks, but I was afraid to say anything. Afraid you would think I was trying to secure my position or that I was being inappropriate. There is nothing inappropriate about two people caring for each other, Zachary said, reaching up to gently wipe a tear from her cheek. But I want to do this right, Fiona. I want to court you properly, the way you deserve. I want you to be certain of your feelings and of mine. I want you to choose me because you want to, not because you feel you have no other choice. I do choose you, Fiona said fiercely, but I understand what you are saying, and I think you are right. We should take our time and do this properly. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something beautiful. May I write to you? Even though we live in the same house, may I write you letters like a proper suitor? The idea was so charming that Fiona laughed despite her tears. Yes, you may write to me, and I will write back. Good. He stepped back, putting proper distance between them, even though Fiona could tell it cost him. Then tomorrow morning you will find my first letter under your door. Sleep well, Fiona Edwards. Sleep well, Zachary Xavier. She went upstairs floating on air, her mind replaying every word of their conversation. He cared for her. He wanted to court her, and she was free to care for him in return without shame or fear. The future, which had looked so bleak just weeks ago, now glowed with possibility. True to his word, the next morning Fiona found a folded piece of paper slipped under her door. She opened it with trembling fingers to find Zachary's neat handwriting covering the page. "Dear Miss Edwards," it began formally, and she smiled at the courtesy. "I hope this letter finds you well on this fine October morning. I wanted to tell you that yesterday evening, when we spoke, I felt as if the sun had risen in the middle of the night. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known, brave and kind, and beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with your face, though I confess I find that beautiful too. I look forward to learning everything about you, all your hopes and dreams and fears. I want to know what makes you laugh and what makes you sad. I want to earn the privilege of being the person you trust with your secrets. Please know that you are safe here, always, and that nothing you could say or do would change how I feel about you. Yours in admiration and affection, Zachary Xavier." Fiona pressed the letter to her chest, overwhelmed by the sincerity and sweetness of his words. She spent her morning chores, composing her response in her head, and that afternoon, while Martha napped, she wrote back. "Dear Mr. Xavier, your letter moved me deeply and gave me courage to be equally honest. I want you to know that I think of you constantly. When I gather eggs in the morning, I remember how you showed me the proper way to approach the hens so they would not peck. When I see the mountains in the distance, I think of how you described growing up in their shadow. You make me feel safe and valued and seen in ways I never have before. I want to know everything about you, too, all the stories and dreams you carry. Thank you for your patience and your kindness. Thank you for finding me when I was lost. Yours in hope and happiness, Fiona Edwards." She slipped the letter under his door that evening, and the next morning found another from him waiting for her. Thus began their unusual courtship, conducted largely through written words despite living under the same roof. At meals and during their daily interactions, they were careful to maintain propriety, but their letters grew increasingly personal and intimate as the weeks passed. Zachary wrote about his father, about the grief of losing him and the weight of responsibility that came with running the ranch alone. He wrote about his dreams of expanding the herd, of building something lasting that could be passed down to future generations. He wrote about his fears that he was not enough, that he would fail and lose everything his father had worked for. Fiona wrote about her childhood in Philadelphia, about the loving parents she missed every day. She wrote about the books she had read and the dreams she had harbored of adventure and romance. She wrote about how lost she had felt after their deaths, how Marianne's betrayal had shattered her trust in her own judgment. But she also wrote about hope, about how this hard land and these good people had begun to heal her broken heart. November arrived with cold winds and the first threat of snow. The ranch work changed, focusing on keeping the animals safe and warm, preserving the last of the harvest, preparing for months of winter isolation. Fiona worked side by side with Martha and Zachary, feeling more like family than an employee with each passing day. Martha was no fool. She saw the glances between them, found the letters they thought they were hiding so cleverly. One evening after Zachary had gone to the barn to check on a cow about to calve, she sat Fiona down at the kitchen table. "I am going to speak plainly," Martha said. "My son is in love with you." Fiona felt her cheeks burn. "Mrs. Xavier, I assure you that nothing improper has happened. I know that child. Zachary is his father's son, honorable to a fault." Martha reached across and took Fiona's hand. "I am not scolding you. I am giving you my blessing. I have watched you these past months, seen how hard you work, how kind you are, how well you fit into our lives. I could not ask for a better daughter if I had chosen one myself. I care for him deeply," Fiona admitted, "but I worry that he feels obligated because he found me in trouble. I do not want to be something he rescues. That boy has been lonely for years, Martha said firmly. After his father died, he threw himself into work and forgot about living. Then you came along and I saw him smile again, really smile. That is not obligation, Fiona. That is love. The real kind, the lasting kind. It has all happened so fast, Fiona said. 3 months ago, I did not know he existed. How can I be certain? Time does not measure love, Martha said wisely. I knew I would marry Zachary's father the day I met him, and we had 50 good years together before his heart gave out. When you know, you know. The question is, do you know? Fiona thought about it, really thought about it. Did she love Zachary? Yes, she realized with sudden clarity. She loved his quiet strength and his gentle humor. She loved how he cared for his mother and his animals. She loved his dreams and his fears and the way he saw the best in people. She loved how he made her feel safe and cherished and free to be herself. It was not the dramatic, swooning love she had read about in novels. It was something deeper and steadier, something that felt like coming home. Yes, she said, I know, I love him. Martha's weathered face broke into a wide smile. Good, then what are you waiting for? He is in the barn trying to help a cow give birth, which is messy business. But once he comes back, you should tell him. But Fiona did not want to wait. She grabbed her shawl and hurried out into the cold night, following the light spilling from the barn. Inside, she found Zachary kneeling in the straw beside a laboring cow, his sleeves rolled up and his face creased with concentration. Is she all right? Fiona asked softly, not wanting to startle him or the cow. Zachary looked up surprised. She will be. First calf, so she is nervous, but she is doing well. You should not be out here. It is cold. I needed to tell you something, Fiona said, moving closer. I cannot wait for another letter. He stood, brushing straw from his knees. What is it? Is something wrong? No, everything is right. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I love you, Zachary Xavier. Not because you saved me or because I work for you or because I feel obligated. I love you because you are good and kind and honorable. I love you because you make me laugh and you make me feel safe. I love you because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. And I needed you to know that right now, not in a letter tomorrow morning. For a moment, he just stared at her, his eyes wide with wonder. Then he closed the distance between them in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms. She felt the solid strength of him, the warmth despite the cold night, the thundering of his heart that matched her own. I love you too, he said against her hair. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you in the dust, so brave and broken and determined not to show it. You are everything I never knew I needed, Fiona. Everything. She tilted her face up to his and he kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost reverent, then deepened into something that made her fingers curl into his shirt and her breath come short. She had been kissed before. Awkward attempts by boys in Philadelphia who meant nothing. This was different. This was everything. Behind them, the cow lowed softly, reminding them where they were. They broke apart, both breathing hard, and Zachary laughed. I have been waiting to do that for months, and I finally get the chance in a barn with a cow watching. I do not mind, Fiona said, and she meant it. Everything about this moment was perfect, from the smell of hay to the cold air to the man holding her close. Marry me, Zachary said suddenly. I know it is too soon, and I should wait and ask properly, but I cannot help it. Marry me, Fiona. Be my wife. Build a life with me here on this land. Let me spend every day proving how much I love you. Yes, Fiona said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. He kissed her again, and this time when they broke apart, they were both grinning like fools. The cow chose that moment to make a final push, and within minutes, a wet, gangly calf was lying in the straw. They watched together as the mother began cleaning her baby, rough swipes of her tongue that made the little one squirm and shake its head. New life, Zachary said softly. A good omen for new beginnings. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Martha took one look at their faces before clapping her hands in delight. About time, she declared. I was beginning to think I would have to lock you two in a room together. When is the wedding? We just got engaged about 5 minutes ago, Zachary said, laughing. Can we have a moment to enjoy it before you start planning? No, Martha said firmly. Winter is coming, and I want you two properly married before the snows make travel impossible. We will talk to the minister this Sunday. A simple ceremony, nothing fancy but legal and binding. I want grandchildren before I am too old to enjoy them. Fiona blushed at the directness, but she was learning that Martha always spoke her mind. They talked late into the night, making plans and sharing joy. Zachary kept hold of Fiona's hand the entire time, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. The wedding took place 3 weeks later on a crisp December morning, with snow threatening in the heavy gray clouds. The minister from Greeley came out to the ranch, along with a few neighbors Martha had insisted on inviting. Fiona wore a dress they had made together, soft green wool that brought out her eyes, with white ribbon trim that Martha had been saving for years. She had no family to stand with her, but Martha filled that role with fierce pride, adjusting Fiona's hair and whispering encouragement. When Fiona walked into the small parlor where everyone waited, Zachary's face transformed with such love and awe that she had to blink back tears. The ceremony was brief and simple. They exchanged vows in voices that shook with emotion, promising to love and honor and cherish for as long as they lived. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed her with such tenderness that several of the neighbor women sighed audibly. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. Martha had prepared a feast, and their neighbors brought dishes to share. There was music and dancing in the kitchen, laughter and toasts with cider, since the Xaviers did not keep alcohol. Fiona danced with her new husband, with neighbors, even with old Mrs. Peterson from the adjoining ranch who told scandalous stories about her own wedding night that made Fiona laugh and blush. As evening fell and the guests departed, Martha announced she would be sleeping in the room off the kitchen for the night to give the newlyweds privacy. She kissed them both and disappeared, leaving Zachary and Fiona alone for the first time as husband and wife. Are you nervous? Zachary asked softly as they stood in the hallway outside what had been his room but was now theirs. A little, Fiona admitted. But mostly I am happy. So happy I can hardly believe this is real. He took her hands in his, bringing them to his lips. It is real. You are my wife and I am your husband, and we have the rest of our lives to figure everything else out together. That night, they came together with gentleness and care, Zachary patient with Fiona's inexperience, both of them learning the new language of physical love. It was awkward at times, sweet at others, and ultimately right in the way that everything between them felt right. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, talking and laughing and making plans for their future. I want to build you a bigger house, Zachary said, tracing patterns on her shoulder. Something with a real parlor and a big kitchen and enough rooms for all the children we are going to have. All the children? Fiona asked, amused. How many are you planning? At least 4, maybe 6. I was lonely growing up as an only child. 6, Fiona repeated, trying to imagine it. Well, we have time to work up to that. The winter settled in around them, bringing deep snows and bitter cold. The ranch work continued, harder now, but manageable with 3 of them sharing the load. Fiona learned to bundle up against the weather, to break ice on water troughs, to help Zachary bring the cattle closer to the barn during the worst storms. The long winter nights were their own kind of gift. With darkness falling early, they had hours together in the warmth of the house. Martha taught Fiona to knit, and they made socks and mittens and scarves while Zachary read aloud from books or worked on his ledgers. Sometimes they just talked, sharing stories and dreams in comfortable silence. Fiona wrote letters to the few acquaintances she still had in Philadelphia, telling them about her new life. She carefully did not mention Marianne, though she thought about her cousin sometimes. The anger had faded, replaced by something closer to pity. Marianne had chosen greed over family, and she would have to live with that choice. Fiona had chosen differently, and she had been rewarded with love and belonging. In February, Fiona realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be certain before telling Zachary, choosing a moment when they were alone in the barn one evening, tending the horses. "I think I might be carrying a baby," she said, watching his face carefully. He went very still. The brush he was using on the horse's coat froze in mid-stroke. "Are you certain?" "Not completely, but fairly certain. It has been nearly 2 months since my last courses." He dropped the brush and pulled her close, his arms tight around her. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. "Happy does not begin to cover it." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You are going to be a mother. I am going to be a father. We are going to have a family." Martha was predictably overjoyed when they told her, immediately launching into plans and preparations. She dug out baby clothes she had saved from when Zachary was small, soft little gowns, yellowed with age, but still serviceable. She and Fiona began sewing new things, tiny garments that seemed impossibly small to make. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring. Fiona dealt with morning sickness and fatigue, but Zachary and Martha were endlessly patient, taking over her chores when she needed rest. As her belly swelled and the baby began to move, Zachary would spend hours with his hand on her stomach, marveling at each kick and flutter. "What do you want?" he asked one night as they lay in bed. "A boy or a girl?" "Healthy," Fiona said firmly. "That is all I want, healthy and strong. But if you could choose," she thought about it, "a boy first, I think, to carry on your name and learn the ranch from you. But then a girl, because I want a daughter to teach and share secrets with, and then more of both until our house is bursting with noise and life." "That sounds perfect," Zachary said, kissing her temple. "Everything with you is perfect." The new house Zachary had promised began to take shape that summer. He and several neighbors worked on it between other tasks, raising walls and putting on a roof. It was not grand, but it was larger than the current house, with a proper parlor and dining room, 3 bedrooms upstairs, and a kitchen that made Martha weep with joy at all the workspace. They moved in late August, a month before the baby was due. Fiona was huge and uncomfortable, waddling more than walking, but she insisted on helping arrange furniture and hang curtains. Their bedroom overlooked the eastern pasture, with a view of the mountains in the distance that took her breath away every morning. The baby came in late September during a thunderstorm that shook the house. Fiona labored for hours with Martha, coaching her and Zachary pacing downstairs, trying not to wear a hole in their new floor. When the baby finally arrived with a lusty wail, Martha called down the stairs, "You have a son, Zachary! A big, healthy boy." Zachary took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the room wild-eyed and disheveled. Fiona lay exhausted against the pillows, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets they had made. She looked up at her husband with such love and pride that he felt his knees go weak. "Meet your son," she said softly. "Meet Thomas Matthew Xavier." Zachary sat carefully on the edge of the bed and took his son in trembling hands. The baby was red-faced and angry, small fists waving, dark hair plastered to his head. He was the most beautiful thing Zachary had ever seen besides his wife. "Thomas," he said, testing the name. "After your father?" he asked Fiona. She nodded. "If that is all right. And Matthew for yours, so he carries both of them with him." "It is perfect," Zachary said, his voice rough with emotion. "He is perfect. You are perfect." He looked at his mother standing nearby with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Ma, come meet your grandson." The three of them sat together in the lamplight, passing the baby between them, marveling at tiny fingers and toes, making promises about all the love they would shower on this new life. Outside, the storm raged, but inside there was only warmth and joy and the beginning of a new chapter. Fiona recovered well from the birth, and Thomas proved to be a relatively easy baby. He ate well and slept in reasonable stretches, and he seemed to find comfort in the sound of his father's voice reading aloud or singing soft trail songs. Zachary was besotted, spending every free moment with his son, showing him the ranch, even though the baby could not yet focus his eyes properly. The years that followed were full and busy. The ranch prospered under Zachary's careful management. They added more cattle, improved the irrigation, built better fences and outbuildings. Fiona kept the books and discovered she had a head for business, finding ways to economize and invest that impressed even the banker in Greeley. Thomas grew into a sturdy, serious little boy with his father's brown eyes and his mother's honey-colored hair. When he was 2, Fiona gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline, a tiny, delicate thing who had her grandmother Martha's determined chin and her father's quiet strength. 2 years after that came another boy, Henry, loud and boisterous from the moment he arrived. Martha thrived with grandchildren to dote on, teaching them songs and stories, sneaking them treats when their parents were not looking. She was in her element, surrounded by the family she had always wanted for Zachary. Her arthritis bothered her some, but she refused to slow down, insisting she had years left to spoil her grandchildren. Fiona sometimes thought about how different her life could have been. If Mary Ann had not abandoned her, she would never have met Zachary. She would probably be running a dress shop somewhere, content perhaps, but never truly happy. Instead, she had this rich, full life, surrounded by love and purpose. She heard news of Mary Ann once, 5 years after that terrible day. A traveling merchant mentioned a woman matching her description in San Francisco, married to a wealthy older man and living in style. Fiona felt nothing at the news, not anger or satisfaction or even curiosity. That part of her life was closed, and she had no desire to open it again. "Do you ever regret it?" Zachary asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 7 now, carefully teaching 5-year-old Caroline to rope a fence post, while 3-year-old Henry chased chickens with more enthusiasm than skill. Martha dozed in her rocking chair, a smile on her sleeping face. "Regret what?" Fiona asked, though she knew what he meant. "Coming west. Everything that happened. Sometimes I think about how much you lost, and I wonder if you wish things had been different." Fiona reached over and laced her fingers through his. "I lost money and a cousin who never truly cared about me," she said firmly. "But I gained everything that matters. I gained you and your mother and our children. I gained a home and a purpose and a life I love. If I could go back and change things, I would not. Every painful step led me here, to you, and I would not trade that for anything." He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "I found you in the dust with nothing, and you gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Fiona corrected. "That is how love works." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. Thomas successfully roped the fence post, and Caroline cheered. Henry abandoned the chickens and ran to his grandmother, clambering into her lap and waking her with his enthusiastic affection. Martha laughed and hugged him close, and Fiona felt her heart swell with gratitude for this messy, beautiful life. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. They added a 4th child, another daughter they named Ruth, who arrived in the spring of 1892. Martha was slowing down by then, her arthritis worse and her energy flagging, but she still insisted on helping with the children and the household. In the fall of 1893, Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 68. They found her in her chair by the fire, her knitting in her lap and a smile on her face. The grief was sharp and deep, but there was comfort in knowing she had lived to see her grandchildren and had been surrounded by love until the end. Thomas was 12 by then, old enough to understand death and to help his father with the increased ranch work. He was a quiet, thoughtful boy who loved the land as much as Zachary did. Caroline at 10 was already a skilled rider and had her mother's head for figures. Henry at 8 was the wild one, always getting into mischief, but with such charm that he rarely stayed in trouble long. And little Ruth at 1 was just learning to walk, stumbling between her siblings with determined concentration. Fiona and Zachary drew strength from each other through their grief and from the children who needed them. Life on the ranch did not pause for mourning. Cattle still needed tending, meals still needed cooking, children still needed raising. They worked and lived and loved, honoring Martha's memory by building the life she had wanted for them. By 1895, the ranch was thriving beyond anything Zachary's father could have imagined. They had one of the largest herds in the county, and Fiona's careful financial management had allowed them to purchase additional land. Thomas at 14 was practically running the daily operations alongside his father, and there was talk of him eventually taking over completely. Zachary was 40 now, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples. Hard work had kept him strong and lean, but there were lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun and worrying through droughts and harsh winters. Fiona was 34, still beautiful to him, though she complained about the changes motherhood and time had wrought. Her honey blonde hair had a few threads of silver now, and her figure was softer than it had been, but to Zachary she was exactly as she had always been. Perfect. They had added one more child to their family in 1894, a surprise baby boy they named Daniel, who arrived when Fiona thought she was done having children. He was a sweet-natured infant who rarely cried and seemed content to watch the organized chaos of his older siblings with wide, interested eyes. On a September evening in 1895, 13 years after their wedding, Fiona and Zachary found themselves alone on the porch again. The children were all finally in bed, Daniel sleeping peacefully in his cradle upstairs, Ruth tucked in beside him, the older children in their rooms doing whatever children did when they were supposed to be sleeping. "Do you remember the first letter you wrote me?" Fiona asked, leaning her head on Zachary's shoulder. "I remember every letter I wrote you," he said, putting his arm around her. "Why?" "You said you wanted to earn the privilege of being the person I trusted with my secrets. I have been thinking about that lately, about trust and secrets, and how you have kept every promise you ever made." "I try," Zachary said quietly. "You made me want to be a better man." "You were already a good man," Fiona said. "The best man. You saved my life, Zachary. In every way a person can be saved. You gave me a home when I had none, food when I was starving, work when I needed purpose. But more than that, you gave me love and respect and partnership. You made me believe I was worth something again." "You were always worth everything," he said fiercely. "I just made sure you knew it." She turned to look at him in the starlight, this man who had changed everything. "I want you to know that these have been the happiest years of my life. Every single day with you has been a gift. Even the hard ones, especially the hard ones, because we faced them together." "Are you feeling all right?" Zachary asked, suddenly concerned. "You are talking like you are saying goodbye." "No," Fiona laughed. "I am feeling perfectly well. I am just feeling grateful, and I wanted you to know." Sometimes I think we get so caught up in the daily work and raising the children that we forget to say the important things. So I am saying them now. I love you, Zachary Xavier. I have loved you since that first night when you fed me stew and treated me like I mattered. I will love you until I draw my last breath, and probably beyond that. "I love you too," Zachary said, his voice thick with emotion. "More than I have words to express. You took a lonely cowboy and his grieving mother and turned us into a family. You brought light and laughter and love into this house. Everything good in my life comes from you." They kissed then, a long, slow kiss that tasted of 13 years of partnership and passion and devotion. When they finally broke apart, they stayed close, breathing the same air, hearts beating in sync. What do you think they will say about us? Fiona asked. Years from now, when Thomas is running this ranch and telling his children about their grandparents, what story will he tell? Zachary thought about it. I hope he tells them about a woman who was brave enough to trust again after being betrayed, about a man who was lucky enough to find her, about two people who built something lasting out of almost nothing, about love that survived and thrived despite everything. That is a good story, Fiona said, a true story. The years that followed continued in much the same vein, full of the ordinary, extraordinary moments that make up a life. The children grew and developed their own personalities and dreams. Thomas did indeed take over more of the ranch operations, proving as capable as his father and grandfather before him. Caroline surprised everyone by developing a passion for teaching and eventually started a small school for the children of nearby ranches. Henry remained the wild card, talking about joining the cavalry or becoming a marshal, dreams that made his mother's heart clench with fear even as she supported his adventurous spirit. Ruth grew into a quiet, gentle girl who loved animals and books in equal measure. Daniel, the baby, was sweet and sensitive, more likely to cry over a butterfly with a torn wing than his own scraped knees. They were all so different, these 5 children, but each one precious beyond measure. In 1900, Thomas married a neighbor's daughter, a practical young woman named Sarah, who fit seamlessly into the ranch life. They built a small house on the property, and within a year, Fiona and Zachary became grandparents to a robust boy named Jacob. Holding her first grandchild, Fiona understood why Martha had been so delighted with her grandchildren. There was something magical about this next generation, this continuation of love and life. Caroline left for teacher training in Denver, breaking her mother's heart even as Fiona supported her dreams. Henry did join the cavalry at 18, and they worried constantly about him stationed at various frontier posts. But he wrote regularly, full of stories and enthusiasm, and came home on leave as often as he could. Ruth and Daniel were still at home, Ruth now 15 and helping more with the household. Daniel at 6, following his father and older brother around the ranch with devoted attention. The house that had seemed so large when they first built it now felt perfectly sized, full of life and love and the accumulated memories of nearly 2 decades. Zachary turned 45 in 1900, and Fiona threw him a surprise party that brought tears to his normally stoic eyes. Friends and neighbors gathered. Thomas and Sarah brought baby Jacob. Even Henry managed to get leave and arrive unexpectedly in his cavalry uniform. Caroline could not make it from Denver, but she sent a long letter that Fiona read aloud, full of love and pride for her father. "Speech!" someone called out, and others took up the chant. Zachary stood, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, but willing to endure it. "I am not good with words," he began, and several people laughed because everyone knew Zachary was a man of few words. "But I want to say thank you. Thank you for being good neighbors and good friends. Thank you for helping us build this life in this community. Most of all, thank you to my wife." He turned to look at Fiona, his eyes suspiciously bright. 18 years ago, I found you in the dust and thought I was helping you. But you were the one who saved me, Fiona. You took a lonely cowboy and made him the richest man in Colorado. Not with money, though we have done well enough, but with love and family and purpose. Everything good in my life comes from you. And I thank God every day that I found you when I did. There was not a dry eye in the house when he finished, and Fiona found herself wrapped in his arms while their friends and family cheered. She thought about that girl she had been, abandoned and desperate, and certain her life was over. She thought about Zachary finding her, helping her, loving her. She thought about every choice and chance and moment that had led them here. The years continued to pass, each one bringing changes and challenges. Colorado entered a new century, and with it came modernization. Automobiles began appearing on the streets of Greeley, though the ranch still relied on horses and wagons. Electricity came to town, though not yet to the outlying ranches. The world was changing rapidly, but some things remained constant. Zachary's love for Fiona never wavered. If anything, it deepened with time, growing richer and more complex. They had been through so much together, weathered so many storms, both literal and figurative. They had buried his mother and various beloved animals. They had celebrated births and weddings. They had argued and made up, struggled and succeeded, laughed and cried, and built a life neither could have imagined in those early days. By 1905, they had 3 grandchildren, with a 4th on the way. Thomas and Sarah were thriving. Their little house expanded to accommodate their growing family. Caroline had married a fellow teacher and was living in Denver, pregnant with her first child. Henry had left the cavalry and was working as a deputy marshal in Wyoming, and to everyone's surprise, had become engaged to the sheriff's daughter. Ruth, at 20, had quietly fallen in love with a young rancher from the next county over, and they were planning a spring wedding. Only Daniel, at 11, was still fully at home, though Fiona knew those years too would pass quickly. On a crisp October morning, Fiona woke early and slipped out of bed without waking Zachary. She made coffee and stepped out onto the porch to watch the sunrise paint the mountains gold and pink. The air smelled of autumn, of frost and dry grass and wood smoke from the chimney. She was 50 now, a fact that seemed impossible. She did not feel old, though her body reminded her sometimes, with aching joints and gray hair and the need for reading glasses. But inside, she still felt like that girl who had fallen in the dust 23 years ago, terrified and alone and desperate for hope. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back into Zachary's warmth. "Could not sleep?" he asked softly. "Just thinking," she said. "Remembering. Good memories, I hope. The best." She turned in his arms to face him. "Do you realize it has been 23 years since you found me?" 23 years, 1 month and 4 days, Zachary said, and she laughed because of course he would know exactly. "What a strange path my life has taken," she mused. "If you had told that desperate girl in the dust that she would end up here with all this, she never would have believed it." "I believed it," Zachary said. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were meant for something more than whatever circumstances had dealt you. I just did not know then that what you were meant for was me." "We were meant for each other," Fiona corrected. "Two broken pieces that fit together perfectly." They stood watching the sunrise together, comfortable in the silence and in each other's presence. This was what love looked like, Fiona thought. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though they had their place, but this quiet morning comfort, this deep knowing, this certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. Over the next few years, their family continued to grow and change. Grandchildren accumulated at a steady pace, filling the ranch with noise and chaos during visits. Thomas proved to be as capable a rancher as his father, and they began seriously discussing transitioning full ownership to him within the next few years. Caroline had 2 children and was happy in Denver, though she visited often. Henry and his wife settled in Wyoming, expecting their first child. Ruth married her rancher and moved to his property, close enough to visit regularly. Daniel, at 14, was showing interest in veterinary medicine, devouring every book on animal care he could find. Zachary turned 52 in 1907, and Fiona threw another party, smaller this time, just family. They gathered around the big table in the dining room that had hosted so many meals and conversations. Looking around at all the faces, the children and grandchildren, and the empty chair where Martha used to sit, Fiona felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "I want to make a toast," she said, standing with her glass of cider. "To family, to this ranch that has sustained us, to Colorado, and this beautiful hard country that shaped us, and most of all, to the man who made all of this possible." She looked at Zachary, her eyes swimming with happy tears. 25 years ago, I had nothing. No family, no money, no hope. You gave me everything. You gave me purpose and respect and love. You gave me this family and this life. Every day with you has been an adventure and a gift. Here's to 25 more years, my love. To 25 more years, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. After the meal, after the children were settled, and the grandchildren tucked into various beds around the house, Fiona and Zachary finally found themselves alone in their bedroom. It had been a long, full day, and they were both pleasantly tired. 25 years, Zachary said, sitting on the edge of the bed to pull off his boots. How is that possible? I swear it was just yesterday you were walking up to me in that barn while I was helping a cow give birth. Time moves fast when you are happy, Fiona said, sitting beside him. I read that somewhere once, and I think it is true. These years with you have flown by. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had ridden a different direction that day? Zachary asked. If I had never found you, I try not to think about it, Fiona said honestly. That path leads nowhere good. I would have starved or worse. But more than that, I would have missed all of this. This life, these children, you. I cannot imagine existing in a world where I never met you. Me neither, Zachary said, taking her hand. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Fiona Xavier. Then, now, always. They prepared for bed in comfortable synchronization, a dance perfected over 25 years of sharing space and life. When they finally lay down together, Fiona curled into Zachary's side the way she had every night for a quarter-century, her head on his shoulder and his arm around her. What do you want for the next 25 years? She asked softly into the darkness. This, Zachary said simply. More of this. More mornings waking up beside you. More evenings watching sunsets. More family dinners and grandchildren and the life we have built together. I do not need anything else. You are enough. This is enough. It is more than enough, Fiona agreed. It is everything. They fell asleep like that, tangled together after 25 years of marriage, still as in love as the day they said their vows. The ranch settled into quiet around them, wind whispering through the eaves, cattle lowing softly in the distance, grandchildren dreaming in their beds. Everything was exactly as it should be. The years rolled on, bringing more changes and more blessings. Daniel did pursue veterinary medicine, heading to school in Fort Collins and returning to set up practice in Greeley, serving the ranching community he had grown up in. Thomas and Sarah's eldest son, Jacob, showed every sign of continuing the ranching tradition into a third generation. In 1910, Zachary and Fiona celebrated their 30th anniversary. It was a quieter affair this time, just the two of them riding out to the spot where Zachary had first found Fiona all those years ago. It was harder to find now. The land developed and changed, but Fiona was certain she recognized the rise where his horse had been waiting. Right here, she said, dismounting carefully. At 55, she was not as spry as she once was, but she managed well enough. This is where I fell. Zachary dismounted and stood beside her, looking at the unremarkable piece of prairie. Best day of my life, he said quietly. Finding you here. Best day of mine, too, though I did not know it at the time. She took his hand, their fingers interlacing with practiced ease. I was so scared that day, so lost. I truly thought my life was over. It was just beginning, Zachary said. Both our lives were just beginning. They stood in silence for a while, remembering. Then Fiona turned to her husband, this man who had aged so gracefully, his hair silver now, but his eyes still that warm brown that had captivated her from the start. I would do it all again, she said fiercely. Every moment, every choice, every step that led me to you. If I had to lose everything and be abandoned and fall in the dust 1,000 times to end up here with you, I would do it gladly. You will never fall again, Zachary promised, pulling her close. I will always be here to catch you. I know, Fiona said, and she did know, deep in her bones. This was the kind of love that lasted, that transcended time and circumstance and hardship. This was the kind of love poets wrote about and ordinary people built their lives around. They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. Smoke rose from the chimney of their house, promising warmth and comfort. They could see lights in Thomas and Sarah's house across the yard, and in the distance the lights of Greeley twinkled as the town settled into evening. Home, Fiona said softly. Home, Zachary agreed. That night, surrounded by the life they had built together, Fiona wrote in the journal she had been keeping for years. She wrote about finding Zachary, about falling in love, about building a family and a legacy. She wrote about loss and joy, hardship and triumph, the ordinary, extraordinary miracle of a life well lived and deeply loved. Today we return to the place where my new life began, she wrote. 30 years ago, I was abandoned by my cousin with nothing but $3 in desperation. I thought I had lost everything. Instead, I found everything. I found the man I would love for a lifetime. I found a home and a family. I found myself, the person I was meant to be. Marianne thought she was leaving me to die, but she actually set me free. Free to find real love, real family, real belonging. I should probably thank her, though I never will. Some doors need to close completely before better ones can open. My door closed the day she left me. It opened the day Zachary found me, and I have been walking through it ever since, into a life more beautiful than I ever dreamed possible. She closed the journal and set it aside, knowing her children and grandchildren might read it someday. Let them know this story, she thought. Let them know that love is real and lasting and worth fighting for. Let them know that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best ones. Let them know that kindness matters, that second chances exist, that hope is never truly lost. Zachary came to bed, sliding under the covers beside her. Without words, they turned to each other, bodies fitting together with the ease of 3 decades of practice. They made love slowly, tenderly, with the deep intimacy of long partnership. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, hearts beating in sync. I love you, Fiona whispered into the night. I love you too, Zachary whispered back. Always and forever. And that, Fiona thought, as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, was the truest thing she had ever known. Their love was always and forever, tested by time and proven strong. She had started with nothing and ended with everything. She had been lost and been found. She had been broken and been healed, all because one cowboy had ridden in the right direction on a September afternoon in 1882 and found a desperate woman in the dust. All because he had chosen kindness over indifference, had seen worth where others might have seen burden. All because love was real and true and powerful enough to change everything. The years continued, as years do, each one bringing its share of moments, both momentous and mundane. They celebrated holidays and anniversaries, mourned the losses that inevitably came with aging, rejoiced in new births and weddings and achievements. Their family grew and spread across Colorado and beyond, but the ranch remained at the heart of it all, the place they all returned to for reunions and remembering. Zachary and Fiona grew old together gracefully, their love mellowing but never dimming. At 60, 70, and beyond, they could still be found sitting on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the mountains in glorious colors. They held hands and told old stories and made new memories, grateful for every day they were given. When asked the secret to their lasting love, Fiona would always say the same thing. We chose each other every day, not just on our wedding day, but every single day after. We chose kindness and patience and forgiveness. We chose to see the best in each other. We chose love again and again, until choosing it became as natural as breathing. And Zachary would add, I found her when she had nothing, and she gave me everything. That is not a transaction you can repay. You can only honor it by living a life worthy of such a gift. Their story became legend in Greeley. the tale of the abandoned woman and the cowboy who saved her, the love that blossomed in the dust and grew into something beautiful and lasting. Young couples would sometimes ride out to the ranch to ask for advice or blessings on their own marriages. Zachary and Fiona always welcomed them, always shared their story, always sent them home with the same message. Love is a choice and a commitment, and it is worth every sacrifice, every struggle, every moment of doubt, because in the end, love is all that truly matters. As they entered their eighth decade together, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great grandchildren, Fiona would sometimes look at Zachary and marvel at the journey they had taken. From that desperate day in 1882 to this blessed present, they had lived a love story for the ages. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and true and lasting. And every night, as they settled into bed together, Fiona would whisper the same words she had whispered for over 50 years. I love you, Zachary Xavier. And every night he would whisper back, I love you too, Fiona Xavier. Thank you for falling in the dust that day. Thank you for letting me find you. Thank you for giving me everything. Their love was a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of commitment, and the miracle of two hearts finding each other against all odds. It was a love that started with nothing and became everything, a love that saved two people and created a legacy that would last for generations. And it all began because her cousin abandoned her when the money ran out, and the cowboy found her and made sure she had enough, not just enough food or shelter or money, but enough love to last a lifetime and beyond, enough love to heal old wounds and build new dreams, enough love to change everything, more than enough, always more than enough.